Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now let's dive into today's story. Dr. Brian Mueller gripped his surgical instruments with practiced precision, his dark eyes focused intently on the tiny heart before him. The 6-month-old patient's life hung in the balance as Brian's skilled hands worked to repair the congenital defect. BP dropping, Dr. Mueller, the anesthesiologist, announced. Brian didn't flinch. His steady hands continued their intricate dance as he commanded. Push 0.1 of AP. The monitor's beeping stabilized, and Brian completed the final suture with methodical accuracy. Beautiful work as always, Dr. Mueller. Dr. Sarah Chun, his assistant surgeon, remarked as they scrubbed out. That's the third successful complex repair this week. Brian merely nodded, his mind already drifting to his own children at home. 3 miracles he'd fought so hard to have, yet something about them nagged at the edges of his consciousness. He pushed the thought away, just as he'd done countless times before. Going home to those beautiful kids of yours? Sarah asked, breaking into his thoughts. Not yet. Still have rounds and paperwork, Brian replied, his tone clipped. He learned early in his career that maintaining professional distance was crucial. His reputation as Boston Children's Hospital's most formidable chief of pediatric surgery wasn't built on friendly chatter. In his office, Brian stared at the family photo on his desk. Jack and Emma, the twins, smiled back at him with their striking blue eyes that matched neither his brown nor Pamela's green. Sophie, their surprise blessing 2 years later, shared the same azure gaze. He remembered the years of fertility treatments, the quiet desperation as they tried to conceive, the whispered conversations with Pamela about donor options. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother, June, having dinner with Devin and the kids. Don't worry about rushing home. Brian's jaw clenched. His mother's relationship with his best friend had grown increasingly peculiar over the years. What started as occasional babysitting help had evolved into an intimate familiarity that made him uneasy. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he barked. Devin Draper's familiar face appeared, sporting his characteristic easy smile. Hey, Chief. Heard about the Williams baby. Another miracle from the great Dr. Mueller. Brian's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. Just doing my job. Thought you were having dinner with my family? On my way there now. Wanted to check if you'd join us? Devin leaned against the doorframe with casual confidence. Can't. Got a department meeting in 20 minutes. Brian turned back to his computer, effectively dismissing his friend. Your loss. The kids always ask for you, you know. Devin's words carried a hint of something. Pride? Possession? That made Brian's fingers pause over his keyboard. Later that evening, Brian finally arrived home to find Devin still there, helping Jack with his math homework while Pamela and June cleaned up in the kitchen. Sophie sat on Devin's lap, playing with his tie, while Emma showed him her latest art project. Daddy! Sophie squealed, but remained perched on Devin's knee. Hey, stranger, Pamela called out, her tone light, but her eyes avoiding direct contact. We save you a plate. June emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Oh, Brian, you should have seen Jack at baseball practice today. Devin taught him this new pitching technique. I'm sure he did, Brian interrupted, his voice carrying a sharp edge that made everyone except Devin tense slightly. It's getting late. Don't you have early rounds tomorrow, Devin? Just about to head out, Devin replied smoothly, standing up and settling Sophie into the chair. Great dinner as always, Pam. June, thanks for the photos. I'll get them framed for the office. Brian watched as his mother hugged Devin goodbye, noticed how she held on a fraction too long. He observed Pamela's quick glance away when Devin's hand brushed her shoulder in passing. He cataloged every interaction with the same attention to detail he used in surgery. After the kids were in bed, Brian found June in the study, organizing what appeared to be family photos. You've been spending a lot of time with Devin lately, he remarked, his tone carefully neutral. June barely looked up. He's practically family, Brian. And he's so good with the children. You know how much they adore him. Maybe too good, Brian muttered. What's that supposed to mean? June's hands stilled over the photos. Nothing. Just an observation. Brian picked up one of the pictures. Devin at Jack's last birthday party. All three kids piled on his lap, their blue eyes matching his perfectly. Interesting choice of photos you're sharing with him. He's their godfather, Brian. And unlike some people, he makes time for them. June's words carried a deliberate sting. Brian's expression hardened, but his voice remained controlled. I save children's lives, Mother. That's what I do. Yes, other people's children. Always other people's children. June gathered her photos and stood. I'm heading home. Don't worry about dropping the kids at school tomorrow. Devin's taking them. Brian watched her leave, then pulled out his phone. He opened his contacts and scrolled to Lawrence Lewis's number, hesitating only briefly before typing. Need your services. Discreetly. Call me tomorrow. In his home office, Brian pulled up his children's birth records on his laptop. He stared at the dates, the medical details, trying to piece together a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. The fertility treatments, Devin's constant presence, his mother's strange behavior. Something wasn't adding up. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Pamela stood in the doorway, wine glass in hand. Coming to bed? Later. He didn't look up from his screen. Brian. Pamela's voice held a note of concern. Is everything okay? You seem distant lately. Brian finally turned to face his wife, studying her with the same intensity he brought to difficult diagnoses. Tell me something, Pam. During all those fertility treatments, did Devin ever consult with you? Professionally or otherwise? Pamela's hand tightened on her wine glass. What? No, of course not. Why would you ask that? Just curious about the timing. He was around a lot during those years. He's your best friend. Of course he was around. Pamela's voice carried a defensive edge that Brian filed away for future reference. He is my best friend. Brian turned back to his computer. Good night, Pam. After she left, Brian opened his browser and began researching genetic inheritance patterns for eye color. As a surgeon, he'd focused his studies on anatomy and surgical techniques, but now he found himself diving deep into genetics. Brown eyes and green eyes producing 3 blue-eyed children. The statistical improbability nagged at him like a surgical sponge count that didn't add up. His phone buzzed again. Another text from June. Don't forget, Devin's taking the kids to the Science Museum this weekend while you're on call. Brian's fingers tightened around his phone as he typed his response. I'll make other arrangements. Then he opened his email and began composing a message to Dr. Amy Liu in genetics. It was time to start asking the right questions. Dr. Amy Liu's office felt unusually cold as Brian reviewed Sophie's genetic markers on the screen before them. The patterns danced across his vision, each anomaly adding to the weight in his chest. I've never seen anything quite like this in a routine screening, Dr. Liu admitted, her finger tracing a particular sequence. These markers typically follow very specific inheritance patterns. Have you ever had your own DNA analyzed, Brian? Brian opened his mouth to respond, but his pager burst to life. 10-year-old, ruptured appendix. I have to take this. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Brian, wait, Dr. Liu called after him. There's something else. But he was already striding down the hallway, his white coat billowing behind him. In the surgical prep room, Brian's hands moved automatically through the scrubbing routine as his mind churned with possibilities. The conversation between 2 nurses at the next sink barely registered until he heard Devin's name. Dr. Draper's old case files? Nurse Martinez was saying. That's weird. Why would Mercy Hospital want records from his teenage years? Something about updating their system, Nurse Chen replied. But get this. They're specifically requesting his endocrinology records. Brian's scrubbing slowed imperceptibly. Endocrinology, hormone treatments, fertility. Dr. Mueller? The surgical resident's voice broke through his thoughts. Patients prepped and ready. The operation proved challenging. The appendix more deteriorated than the scans had indicated. Brian worked with mechanical precision, his personal concerns locked away as he focused on saving his young patient. 3 hours later, he emerged from to find his phone flooded with notifications. 3 missed calls from Dr. Liu. A text from Lawrence Lewis that made his blood run cold. Man, you need to see this. Your mother's been making some interesting money transfers. That evening, Brian sat at the kitchen table helping Jack with his homework, his surgeon's eyes studying his son's features with new intensity. The science worksheet on genetic traits lay between them like a landmine. "So if both my parents have brown eyes," Jack was saying, "they can't have a blue-eyed baby, right?" Brian's pen paused over the paper. "That's generally correct. Eye color inheritance is complex, but Uncle Devin has blue eyes like us." Emma chimed in from across the table. "Maybe we got them from him." The innocent comment hung in the air like smoke. Brian maintained his composure, years of surgical crisis management keeping his voice steady. "Uncle Devin isn't actually related to us, Emma. But Grandma says he's family," Sophie piped up. "She has lots of pictures of him in her special album." Brian's head snapped up. "What special album?" "The one she keeps in her desk," Sophie continued, oblivious to the tension radiating from her father. "She shows it to Uncle Devin sometimes when they think we're not looking." Before Brian could probe further, June's voice drifted in from the kitchen where she was talking on the phone. "Of course I'll keep the photos safe, Devin. The album goes back 7 years. Every meeting, every special moment. They deserve to know their real story someday." Brian's hand clenched around his pen, the plastic cracking under his grip. The children jumped at the sound. "Daddy," Sophie's voice wavered. "Why don't you all go watch TV for a bit?" Brian suggested, his tone carefully controlled. "I need to talk to Grandma." As the children scampered off, Brian rose from his chair with the deliberate movement of a predator. He walked to the kitchen entrance, watching his mother end her call and slip her phone into her pocket. "Interesting conversation?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. June startled slightly. "Brian, I didn't hear you come in." Clearly, he stepped into the kitchen, positioning himself between June and the exit. "Tell me about this album, Mother." "The one with 7 years of special moments with Devin." June's face paled slightly, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "It's just family photos, Brian. You're always so suspicious lately. Family photos that the children deserve to know about someday." Brian's voice carried the same precision he used when calling for surgical instruments. "What exactly do they deserve to know, Mother?" "I only meant," June began, but Brian cut her off. 7 years. That's an interesting timeline. Right around when Pamela and I started fertility treatments, isn't it?" The color drained completely from June's face. "Brian, you're reading too much into things. You always do this. Always have to control everything, analyze everything." "You're right. I do analyze everything. It's what keeps my patients alive." Brian stepped closer, his presence filling the kitchen. "And right now, every analysis is telling me something's very wrong with this picture." June's hand trembled as she reached for her purse. "I should go. It's getting late." "It certainly is." Brian watched her gather her things, noting every nervous gesture. "One more thing, Mother. Those money transfers you've been making, the ones matching Devin's deposits to that offshore account, we'll be discussing those very soon." June froze in the doorway, her back to her son. "You don't understand anything, Brian. Sometimes people do things, make choices for the greater good." "The greater goods?" Brian's laugh held no humor. "Is that what we're calling fraud and conspiracy these days?" June hurried out without responding, leaving Brian alone in the kitchen. He pulled out his phone and dialed Lawrence Lewis. "I need everything you can find on Devin's medical history," he instructed without preamble. "Specifically, any fertility-related treatments or conditions. And I want every detail about those financial transfers, no matter what it costs." After ending the call, Brian walked to his home office and opened his laptop. A new email from Dr. Liu awaited him. "Brian, these genetic markers in Sophie's results, they indicate a pattern I've seen before. In Devin's old cases. We need to talk." Brian's fingers flew across the keyboard as he composed his response. Years of surgical training had taught him that sometimes you had to cut deep to remove a cancer. And right now, his family had a malignancy that needed excising. Lawrence Lewis's private investigation office smelled of coffee and old paper files. The veteran PI spread photographs across his desk while Brian stood examining them. His surgical precision now turned to analyzing surveillance shots. "Your mother's quite the actress," Lawrence commented, pointing to a series of photos. "Here she is playing loving grandmother. But look at these." He laid out another sequence. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork. She arrives 10 minutes after Devon's car pulls in. Always positions herself by the front windows. Classic lookout behavior. Brian picked up a photo of Devon and Pamela in what appeared to be an intimate conversation on their back patio. Times, all during your scheduled surgeries. Lawrence pulled out a thick folder. But that's not the interesting part. Take a look at these bank statements. Brian's eyes narrowed as he scanned the documents. Regular deposits from my mother, matched by larger ones from Devon. All going to an offshore account in the children's names. Account opened 7 years ago, Lawrence added meaningfully. Right when your fertility treatment started, Brian's jaw tightened. Give me access to Devon's medical records from Mercy Hospital. Already done. Lawrence handed over another file. Took some creative maneuvering, but you want to sit down for this one? Brian remained standing as he read, his expression growing darker with each page. Klinefelter syndrome, diagnosed in his teens. Complete sterility confirmed through multiple tests. He looked up sharply. Who's Dr. Gabriel Compton? Endocrinologist at Mercy. Been prescribing testosterone treatments to your friend for years. Lawrence leaned back in his chair. Want me to arrange a conversation? No. Brian's voice carried the same authority he used in the OR. I'll handle Compton myself. Later that day, Brian sat in his office at Boston Children's, phone pressed to his ear. Dr. Compton? This is Dr. Brian Mueller. I'm consulting on a case involving one of your former patients, Devon Draper. Dr. Mueller? The pediatric surgeon? Compton sounded impressed. What's your interest in Devon's case? I'm reviewing some fertility treatment protocols, Brian replied smoothly. Your work with him has caught my attention. Ah, yes. Challenging case. Complete azoospermia due to Klinefelters. Though he was quite insistent about maintaining appearances. Kept requesting documentation showing improved sperm counts. Brian's free hand curled into a fist. Did you provide such documentation? Heavens no! Compton sounded offended. But he found someone who would. Heard through the grapevine, he was using forged lab results to convince some poor woman he was becoming fertile. Completely unethical, of course. After ending the call, Brian contacted Margarita Schaefer, the hospital's leading genetic counselor. Her reputation for discretion matched her expertise in DNA analysis. I need these tests run immediately, Brian explained, sliding 3 sealed envelopes across her desk. My children's DNA samples. Compare them against my profile in the hospital's database. Margarita raised an eyebrow. This is unusually personal, Dr. Mueller. Are you sure you want to proceed? Absolutely. Brian's voice carried the same unwavering certainty he brought to his most difficult surgeries. I need to know the truth. While waiting for the results, Brian immersed himself in surgery after surgery, his scalpel cutting through flesh with controlled precision, each incision a rehearsal for the confrontation to come. His colleagues noticed the change in him, a new intensity behind his already formidable presence. Your DNA analysis is ready, Margarita announced 3 days later, closing her office door behind him. I ran the test twice to be certain. Brian stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, as she pulled up the results on her monitor. Show me. The genetic markers are conclusive. Margarita highlighted several sequences. These children are definitely yours, Dr. Mueller. There's no question about paternity. Brian's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes blazed with a cold fury. You're absolutely certain? The probability exceeds 99.9%. She turned to face him directly. Which makes me wonder why you needed to check. Because someone wanted me to doubt it, Brian replied, his voice carrying the weight of 7 years of manipulation. Someone orchestrated an elaborate scheme to make me question everything about my family. Back in his office, Brian reviewed all the evidence Lawrence had gathered. The surveillance photos showing Devon's regular visits during his surgeries. The bank statements revealing the intricate web of financial transactions. Dr. Compton's testimony about Devon's desperate attempts to hide his sterility. The forged fertility documents. His mother's secret photo album documenting years of calculated deception. Brian's phone buzzed with a text from Pamela. Devon's joining us for Sunday dinner. Mom invited him. A thin smile crossed Brian's face as he typed his response. Perfect. He opened his desk drawer and removed a manila envelope, carefully adding Margarita's DNA results to the collection of evidence inside. Each document represented a strand in the web of lies he was about to unravel. The children's blood type records, the bank statements, the surveillance photos, Devon's medical history, all of it painting a picture of betrayal so profound it would have broken a lesser man. But Brian Mueller wasn't just any man. He was a surgeon who held lives in his hands daily, who made decisions that meant the difference between life and death. He had spent years cultivating a reputation for being ruthless in the operating room, for never hesitating to cut out diseased tissue to save the whole. Now, looking at the evidence spread across his desk, Brian prepared for perhaps the most important surgery of his life, excising the cancer of deception that had infected his family. Sunday dinner would be the beginning, not of a confrontation, but of a reckoning. He picked up his phone one last time, dialing Lawrence Lewis. "Everything in place?" Brian asked. "All set," Lawrence confirmed. "Recording devices installed. Security team will be in position. Your attorney has the documents ready to file first thing Monday morning." "Good." Brian's voice carried the same calm authority he used before beginning a complex procedure. "Time to clean house." Dr. Amy Lou's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up file after file on her dual monitors. Brian stood behind her, his presence commanding even in silence, as she revealed the depth of the deception. "Look at this," she said, highlighting a section of the medical records. The blood type documentation for all three children was altered within hours of their births. But whoever did it didn't know about our archive backup system. Brian leaned closer, his expression hardening. "Show me the timestamps." "Here." Dr. Lou pulled up a log file. Every modification corresponds perfectly with Devon's hospital rotations. He used his consulting privileges to access and alter the records. "Print everything," Brian commanded. "I want a complete audit trail." "Brian," Dr. Lou hesitated, "this goes beyond medical ethics violations. This is fraud. We're legally obligated to report this to the hospital board. And we will." Brian's voice carried the same authority he used in the operating room. "But first, I need to understand the full scope of this corruption." In his office, Brian reviewed the evidence with methodical precision. The altered blood types, the falsified genetic markers, the carefully orchestrated deception spanning 7 years. Each document added another layer to the betrayal. His phone buzzed, Lawrence Lewis requesting an urgent meeting. The PI's office was cluttered with files and surveillance equipment. Lawrence pulled up satellite images on his computer, showing 3 properties in Vermont. "Your mother's been busy," Lawrence explained, clicking through the photos. "All purchased through shell companies within the last year. All within walking distance of Devon's new medical practice." Brian studied the locations. "Show me the financial trail." "That's where it gets interesting." Lawrence opened a spreadsheet. "The offshore account isn't just receiving deposits anymore. It's being used to establish new identities. Your mother's been siphoning money from multiple sources to fund what looks like an escape plan. Elaborate. Devon's setting up a new practice in Vermont, but it's not just any practice. He's specifically targeting fertility cases." Lawrence pulled out more documents. "He's been building a reputation in the community, making connections. Meanwhile, your mother's been quietly transferring funds, setting up trust accounts, even exploring private school options in the area. They're planning to take my children," Brian stated, his voice cold with controlled fury. "Gets worse." Lawrence handed over a thick file. "Remember that nurse I mentioned? Irma Mercado? She reached out after seeing Devon's records being accessed. She's got quite a story to tell." Brian opened the file, reading Irma's sworn statement. Her detailed account of Devon's obsession with fertility, his rage when his ex-wife left him, his gradual descent into fraud and deception painted a picture of a man consumed by his inability to have children. His ex-wife left him because he couldn't have kids, Irma had written. After that, he changed, started watching your family, talking about how you didn't deserve them. He'd spend hours looking at photos of your children, saying they should have been his. Brian closed the file, his decision made. Set up surveillance on all 3 properties. I want to know every person who enters or leaves. And give me everything you can on Devon's new practice. Patient records, financial statements, everything. Already in progress. Lawrence pulled out another file. But there's something else you should see. Your mother's been making regular trips to Vermont, meeting with school administrators, pediatricians, even child psychologists. She's setting up a complete support system, almost like she's preparing for a custody battle. Or a kidnapping, Brian corrected, his medical training helping him see the pattern. They're establishing a foundation to make it look like the children have been there all along. Medical records, school records, community connections, everything they'd need to create a new life. Lawrence nodded grimly. Want me to alert the authorities? Not yet. Brian stood, straightening his suit jacket with precise movements. First, we're going to let them think their plan is working. I want every piece of evidence, every connection, every conspirator exposed. When we move, it will be decisive. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. Have your team ready for Sunday dinner. I want every word, every gesture recorded. And Lawrence? Make sure the surveillance van is out of sight. My mother's gotten too good at playing lookout. As Brian left the PI's office, his phone buzzed with a text from Pamela. Devin's bringing a special bottle of wine for Sunday. Says he has an announcement to make. Brian allowed himself a small, cold smile. Let them think they had the upper hand. Let them believe their carefully constructed web of lies was still intact. Sunday dinner would show them exactly who they were dealing with. He spent the next 2 days preparing, gathering additional evidence, setting every piece in place. He contacted Sandy Randolph, a colleague whose own experience with parental alienation made her the perfect ally. I need you to take the children Sunday evening, he explained during a private meeting in his office. Whatever happens, they shouldn't be there to witness it. Sandy understood immediately. I'll make it seem like a regular sleepover. The kids love playing with my daughter anyway. By Saturday night, Brian had prepared his own announcement. A manila envelope containing 7 years of evidence, each document carefully selected for maximum impact. He learned from surgery that timing was everything. Each revelation would be like a precise incision, cutting away the diseased tissue of lies until nothing remained but the harsh truth. Sunday evening arrived with deceptive calm. Brian had arranged everything with surgical precision. The children safely away at Sandy's, recording devices hidden throughout the house, Lawrence's team monitoring from their surveillance van, and his attorney Sonia Cruz ready to file sealed court documents first thing Monday morning. The dining room table became an operating theater of sorts, with Brian positioning himself strategically at the head, the manila envelope placed precisely beside his plate. He watched Pamela fuss with the table settings, noted how her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the wine glasses. June arrived first, carrying a casserole dish and wearing an expression of barely concealed anticipation. The children aren't here? She asked, failing to hide her disappointment. Sleep over at Sandy's, Brian replied evenly. They've been looking forward to it all week. Devin arrived last, wearing an expensive new suit and carrying the promised bottle of wine. Brian observed how comfortable he seemed, how naturally he moved through their home. 7 years of deception had made him too confident. Special occasion? Brian asked, nodding toward the wine. You could say that. Devin shared a quick glance with Pamela that spoke volumes. They settled into their seats, in parody of normal family dinner. Brian watched them all, his mother's nervous energy, Pamela's forced cheerfulness, Devin's barely contained smugness. He let them serve the food, pour the wine, exchange meaningful looks they thought he didn't notice. Halfway through the main course, Pamela cleared her throat. The wine had given her false courage, just as Brian had anticipated. We need to talk about something important, she began, her voice slightly slurred. About the children? What about them? Brian kept his tone neutral, letting her proceed with their rehearsed script. It's time for the truth to come out. Pamela reached for Devin's hand across the table. The children, they're not yours, Brian. They're Devin's. The silence that followed was perfect, heavy with their anticipation of his breakdown, his anger, his devastation. Instead, Brian reached for the manila envelope. Interesting theory, he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used before making the first incision in a difficult surgery. But science tells a different story. He began laying out documents with precise movements. Devin's medical records from Mercy Hospital, complete sterility due to Klinefelter syndrome. Multiple fertility tests confirming zero sperm count. Genetic markers showing the children are definitively mine. The color drained from Devin's face as he recognized the authentic test results. Pamela's wine glass slipped from her fingers, staining the tablecloth red. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Devin showed me his fertility results. They were improving." "Forged," Brian stated flatly. "Just like the children's blood type records he altered after their births. Just like the sperm count tests he bribed a lab technician to falsify." June stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't understand anything, Brian. You were never there, always at the hospital, always saving other people's children while neglecting your own." "Sit down, Mother." Brian's command cut through her hysteria. "We're not done. Would you like to explain the offshore account? The properties in Vermont? The false identities you've been arranging for my children? How dare you?" Pamela's voice rose hysterically. "You're making things up because you can't accept. Everything is documented," Brian interrupted, his voice like steel. "Every transaction, every meeting, every phone call. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate when my own mother started planning to kidnap my children?" Devin stood slowly, his medical training helping him recognize the authenticity of the evidence before him. "Brian, let me explain." "Explain what?" Brian's laugh held no humor. "How you manipulated my wife while living under my roof. How you conspired with my mother to steal my children. How you forged medical records and committed fraud. You don't deserve them." Devin suddenly shouted, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "You're never there. They need a father who—" "They have a father," Brian cut him off. "A father who's been watching you all dig your own graves for months. Every scheme, every lie, every betrayal, all documented and ready for the courts." "You can't prove anything," June declared, but her voice wavered. Brian smiled coldly. "Would you like to see the surveillance photos? The bank records? The sworn statements from your conspirators?" Dr. Compton was particularly interested in discussing Devin's fraudulent fertility claims. "You had us watched?" Pamela gasped. "Like you watched me? Plan my surgeries so Devin could play house with my family? Use my mother as a lookout?" Brian's voice remained controlled, but his eyes blazed. "The difference is my surveillance was legal and very, very thorough." That's when Devin snapped. He lunged across the table, years of carefully constructed plans dissolving into blind rage. Brian had anticipated this too. He stepped aside smoothly, letting Devin crash into the china cabinet while security cameras captured everything. "Assault to add to your charges," Brian noted calmly. "Not very professional, Dr. Draper. But then, neither is practicing medicine fraudulently." The immediate aftermath of the confrontation unfolded exactly as Brian had planned. Lawrence's team provided real-time audio and video recordings to his attorney, while hospital security began reviewing Devin's medical credentials based on the evidence of fraud. Pamela sat amid the wreckage of their dinner party, mascara streaking her face as she alternated between threats and pleas. "You can't do this to us," she sobbed. "The children need their mother. The children need truth," Brian corrected her. "Not conspirators who plan to kidnap them." June paced the room, her carefully maintained composure crumbling as she realized the extent of Brian's investigation. "Those properties were investments," she tried to argue. "You're twisting everything." "Really?" Brian pulled out more documents. "Shall we discuss the false passports you began arranging? The trust accounts in different names? The private school applications in Vermont? I was protecting them." June's voice rose hysterically. "From you. From your cold, clinical approach to everything. By stealing them?" Brian's voice cut like a scalpel. "By conspiring to take them across state lines, maybe even out of the country? That's not protection, Mother. That's criminal conspiracy." Devin, nursing a bruised shoulder from his failed attack, attempted a different approach. "Think about what this will do to your reputation, Brian. The scandal. My reputation?" Brian's laugh was sharp and without humor. "Let's discuss reputations, Devin. Specifically, your medical license. How many fertility patients have you defrauded with your fake treatments? How many families have you given false hope?" He turned to his mother. "Or your financial reputation, Mother? The board of the hospital charity might be interested in how you've been laundering money through their accounts. Not to mention the FBI's interest in international financial fraud. You wouldn't, June whispered, finally understanding the depth of her son's ruthlessness. I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother the moment you conspired to steal my children. Brian's voice was devoid of emotion. You're just another perpetrator now. Pamela made one last attempt at manipulation. If you do this, you'll destroy everything. Think about the children. I am thinking about them, Brian responded, which is why I've already arranged for specialized trauma counseling to help them process their mother and grandmother's betrayal. Dr. Houston is particularly experienced in cases of parental alienation. He watched their faces as the full reality of their situation sank in. June's proud defiance crumbled when he mentioned the frozen accounts, not just the offshore ones, but all of them. Pamela's smugness disappeared as he detailed the custody implications of attempted kidnapping. Devin's rage turned to fear as Brian outlined the medical board's preliminary findings. You planned this, Devin accused, realization dawning. All of it. The dinner, the timing, like you planned to steal my family? Brian countered. The difference is my plan was legal. And as of tomorrow morning, very public. He stood, straightening his tie with the same precision he used in preparing for surgery. I suggest you all contact lawyers. You'll need them. The sealed court documents will be filed first thing tomorrow, and the hospital board meets at 9 to review Devin's credentials. Brian, please. Pamela tried one last time. We can work this out. Like you worked out your kidnapping plans? Your money laundering scheme? Your conspiracy to commit fraud? Brian shook his head. There's nothing to work out. You chose your path. Now you get to face the consequences. He walked to the door, then turned back for one final observation. You know what the ironic part is? The children are genetically mine. All your elaborate plans, your years of deception, were based on a lie. You tried to steal what was already mine, and in doing so, you lost everything that was actually yours, your freedom, your reputations, your futures. Brian watched as their facades crumbled under the weight of evidence. June's financial empire frozen, Pamela's custody dreams shattered, Devin's medical career imploding, each of them facing the consequences of their betrayal. Their elaborate scheme had failed, destroyed by the very precision and dedication they'd once mocked. I'll be expecting your lawyers' calls, Brian stated, leaving them to contemplate their ruined futures. Don't attempt to contact the children. He closed the door on their protests, their world of lies finally exposed to the harsh light of truth. The Boston medical community buzzed with tension as Brian's attorney, Sonia Cruz, presented her opening statement to the custody hearing. Her heels clicked against the courtroom floor as she approached the bench, her demeanor as sharp as her precisely tailored suit. Your Honor, she began, her voice carrying throughout the hushed courtroom. What we present today goes far beyond a simple custody dispute. This case involves systematic fraud, international financial crimes, and a thwarted kidnapping conspiracy. Chief Judge Meredith Bentley leaned forward, her expression grave as Sonia laid out the evidence. The attorney's presentation was as methodical as one of Brian's surgeries. Dr. Amy Liu, please take the stand, Sonia called her first witness. Dr. Liu adjusted her glasses as she was sworn in. In my role as genetic counselor, I discovered unauthorized alterations to the children's medical records. The digital trail leads directly to Dr. Draper's login credentials. And these alterations, Sonia prompted, what was their nature? Blood types, genetic markers, all changed to support a false narrative of paternity. But the hospital's archived backup system preserved the original data. From his seat at the plaintiff's table, Brian watched Pamela's face contort as each piece of evidence stripped away her defenses. Her attorney's attempts to object were systematically overruled as Sonia built her case. Lawrence Lewis took the stand next, presenting enlarged photographs of the Vermont properties on digital displays. These residences, he explained, pointing to each location, were purchased through shell companies funded by Mrs. Mueller Sr.'s offshore accounts. Note their strategic location near Dr. Draper's planned medical practice. The PI's testimony continued as he revealed financial records, surveillance photos, and intercepted communications. Mrs. Mueller wasn't just investing in property. She was establishing a complete infrastructure for the children's disappearance: schools, medical records, even false identities. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Rita Hayden, a former patient of Devon's, approached the stand with barely contained anger. Dr. Draper promised he could help us conceive, she testified, her voice trembling. He showed us falsified test results, claimed his treatments were working. We spent our life savings, remortgaged our house, all for treatments he knew were worthless. More former patients came forward, each story adding to the pattern of deception. Brian observed how each testimony landed like physical blows on Devon, who seemed to shrink further into his seat. Bonnie McPherson, Pamela's former broker, provided the financial connection. Mrs. Mueller used her real estate contacts to launder money for Dr. Draper's fraudulent fertility practice. Client trust accounts were used to move funds offshore. The evidence mounted: bank statements showing June's systematic draining of Brian's father's estate, documentation of false identities being established for the children, intercepted communications about school enrollment in Vermont. During a brief recess, Sonia conferred with Brian in a private conference room. "They're crumbling," she observed. "Pamela's attorney has already approached about a plea deal." "No deals," Brian replied firmly. "They chose their path. Now they face every consequence." Back in session, Dr. Gabriel Compton's testimony about Devon's medical fraud drew gasps from the gallery. Dr. Draper's condition makes fertility impossible. He knew this when he began offering treatments to desperate couples. The medical board representatives sat in the gallery, their expressions grim as they took notes. Brian had ensured they would witness every detail of Devon's deception. June's financial advisor reluctantly revealed how she had systematically liquidated assets, converting them to untraceable funds. She claimed it was for the children's future, he testified. "I had no idea she was financing a kidnapping plot." As each witness took the stand, as each piece of evidence was presented, Brian maintained his composed demeanor. He'd learned long ago that true power lay not in emotional outbursts, but in methodical, relentless execution of justice. Chief Judge Meredith Bentley's courtroom fell silent as she prepared to deliver her ruling. Her reputation for zero tolerance of deception had drawn a packed gallery, including numerous medical professionals eager to witness Devon's downfall. "In my 30 years on the bench," she began, her voice cutting through the tension, "I have seldom encountered a case of such calculated manipulation. These children have been living in an elaborate web of lies, spun by the very people entrusted with their care." She turned her stern gaze to Pamela. "Mrs. Mueller, your participation in this scheme is particularly troubling. As their mother, you were supposed to protect these children. Instead, you conspired to tear them away from their father through fraud and deception." Pamela's shoulders shook with silent sobs, but Brian's expression remained impassive. He'd witnessed her performances before. This was just another act. "The court awards full custody to Dr. Brian Mueller," Judge Bentley declared. "Mrs. Mueller's visitation rights will be severely restricted and supervised by court-appointed monitors." The judge turned her attention to June. "Mrs. Mueller Sr., your role in this conspiracy cannot be overlooked. You are hereby barred from any contact with the children. Furthermore, all your financial assets will remain frozen pending criminal investigation." June's face, usually carefully maintained with expensive cosmetics, crumpled in defeat. Her attorney began scribbling notes furiously, but Brian knew any appeal would be futile. The evidence was too overwhelming. As for Dr. Draper, the judge continued, her voice hardening, "This court is referring all evidence of medical fraud to the state medical board. Your current suspension will likely become permanent once they review Dr. Compton's testimony about your falsified fertility treatments." Devon stared straight ahead, his medical career crumbling before his eyes. The board representatives had already left to convene an emergency session. Additionally, Judge Bentley added, "This court is referring evidence of financial crimes to federal prosecutors. The systematic fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping warrant serious criminal investigation." Brian's colleagues from Boston Children's had come to support him. Dr. Bernice Houston, head of pediatric psychology, sat ready with her preliminary therapy plan for the children. Sandy Randolph, who had become an invaluable ally, nodded in approval at each ruling. After the session, Brian met with Dr. Houston in her office to discuss the children's care. Her walls displayed colorful artwork from young patients who had overcome trauma through therapy. They'll need specialized support, Dr. Houston explained, spreading out her proposed treatment plan. Each child will process this differently. The twins are old enough to understand betrayal, while Sophie may struggle with abandonment issues. Whatever they need, Brian agreed. Cost is no object. Sandy Randolph joined them, adding her perspective as someone who had helped children through similar situations. The key is maintaining stability while they process everything. Routine becomes crucial during these transitions. Brian listened intently, taking notes with the same focus he brought to complex surgical procedures. He would approach his children's healing with the same dedication he brought to saving others' lives. 1 year had passed since the courtroom confrontation. Brian sat in his home office, reviewing Jack's baseball tournament schedule while maintaining the same precise organization he brought to his surgical calendar. A knock at his door revealed Emma, clutching her latest art project. The therapy sessions with Dr. Houston had encouraged creative expression, and Emma had thrown herself into painting with remarkable dedication. "Dad?" She held up her artwork, an abstract piece filled with interweaving lines and bold colors. Dr. Houston said, "I should show you. It's about our family." Brian studied the painting with the same attention he gave to surgical imaging. "Tell me about it," he encouraged, noting how the chaos of colors gradually resolved into more organized patterns. "The dark parts are the lies," Emma explained, pointing to turbulent sections. "But see how they're getting smaller?" Dr. Houston says, "That's progress." Sophie bounced in, her 6-year-old energy unchanged by the past year's events. Too young to fully grasp the adult complexities, she had adapted to their new normal with remarkable resilience. "Sandy's here," she announced excitedly. "She brought cookies for our therapy homework." Sandy Randolph had become more than just a colleague or neighbor. Her understanding of their situation, born from personal experience, had made her an essential part of their support system. She entered carrying a plate of cookies and her trademark warm smile. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said, setting down the cookies. The kids wanted to practice their communication exercises. Brian gestured for her to join them, observing how naturally she interacted with his children. Unlike the manipulative affection they'd known from Pamela and June, Sandy's warmth was genuine and unforced. The peaceful moment was interrupted by a call from his attorney. Pamela had violated the visitation agreement again, showing up at the children's school with Devin. Brian's expression hardened as he listened to the details. "File for an immediate restraining order," he instructed, "and contact the court-appointed monitors. Her supervised visitation privileges are revoked until further notice." After ending the call, he found a letter in his mail, June's latest attempt to justify her actions. The prison stationery was cheap, unlike the expensive stationery she'd once preferred. "I only wanted what was best for the children," she'd written. Devin promised he could give them a better life. Brian filed the letter with the others in a folder marked evidence, a habit from the investigation he hadn't abandoned. But unlike those dark days of gathering proof, these documents served as reminders of why he had fought so hard. Later that evening, helping Emma with her science homework, another genetics project that struck him as ironically appropriate, she asked the question he'd been expecting. "Dad, are you sad that Mom and Grandma lied?" Brian considered his response carefully, aware that Dr. Houston would want them to discuss this moment in their next session. "I'm sad they chose lies over truth," he replied honestly. "But I'm grateful because it taught us the most important lesson. Real family is built on honesty and love, not secrets and schemes." That night, after checking on each sleeping child, a ritual he never skipped, no matter how late his surgeries ran, Brian reflected on their journey. The betrayal had cost him a wife, a mother, and a best friend, but it had given him something far more valuable. His office walls told their story now, not in June's carefully curated photos, but in his children's therapy art. Among medical diplomas and surgical certificates hung the DNA results that had exposed the truth, framed not as a weapon, but as a testament to the power of facts over deception. Brian had rebuilt their life on a foundation of truth, showing his children that integrity, even in the face of betrayal, was the greatest strength they could possess. His ruthless pursuit of justice had cleared the way for genuine healing, proving that sometimes the harshest truths led to the most profound recovery. Epilogue: 5 years later. The prestigious Journal of Medical Ethics conference room buzzed with anticipation as Dr. Brian Mueller approached the podium. His keynote address, Ethics in Medical Practice, A Personal Journey, had drawn an unprecedented audience. Among them sat Dr. Amy Liu and Dr. Gabriel Compton, both now leading figures in medical ethics reform. The foundation of medical practice isn't just knowledge or skill, Brian began, his commanding presence silencing the room. It's integrity. 5 years ago, my personal experience exposed how deeply deception could corrupt our profession. In the front row, his children watched with pride. Jack and Emma, now teenagers, had grown into confident young adults under their father's unwavering guidance. Sophie, 11 going on 30, took notes with the same precision she'd learned from watching Brian in his home office. Sandy sat beside them, her wedding ring catching the light. Their marriage 2 years ago hadn't changed the careful way she'd built relationships with the children. It had simply formalized the family they'd already become. The medical board's investigation into Devin Draper's practice had uncovered a network of fraud that stretched across 3 states. His trial had become a landmark case in medical ethics, leading to stricter protocols for fertility treatment documentation and patient care. Dr. Draper's sentencing last month to 15 years for medical fraud, financial crimes, and attempted kidnapping conspiracy serves as a reminder, Brian continued. Our profession demands absolute integrity. Devin's fall had been spectacular. After his medical license was permanently revoked, he'd attempted to flee to Canada, but was apprehended at the border. The prosecution had presented evidence of similar schemes at 3 previous hospitals, revealing a pattern of exploitation stretching back over a decade. Pamela's fate had been equally severe, though different in nature. Her real estate license revoked, her assets seized, she'd been sentenced to 8 years for money laundering and conspiracy. The court-mandated psychiatric evaluation had revealed a personality disorder characterized by pathological lying and manipulation. Brian maintained detailed records of her attempts to contact the children, each violation of the restraining order, each intercepted letter, each failed attempt to approach them at school. These documents ensured her supervised visitation rights remained permanently revoked. After his presentation, Brian met with Lawrence Lewis in the conference hotel's restaurant. The PI had parlayed his role in exposing the conspiracy into a successful consulting business, specializing in medical fraud investigation. Heard from your mother lately? Lawrence asked, sliding a folder across the table. June's last appeal was denied, Brian replied, reviewing the documents. She'll serve her full 12-year sentence for financial fraud and conspiracy. The forensic accountants are still discovering accounts she'd hidden. June's carefully constructed social status had crumbled completely. Her country club friends, hospital charity board members, and social circle had abandoned her as evidence of her crimes became public. She spent her days in federal prison, writing letters that Brian filed away unread. The case had revolutionized hospital security protocols. Dr. Liu now headed a task force on medical records protection, implementing systems to prevent the kind of manipulation Devin had performed. She'd used their case as a teaching tool, showing how technological safeguards could protect patient integrity. Sandy mentioned the twins are looking at medical school, Lawrence commented. Brian nodded, allowing himself a small smile. Jack's interested in pediatric surgery. Emma's leaning toward psychiatry. Her experience with Dr. Houston inspired her. Dr. Bernice Houston had become more than just the children's therapist. Her research on parental betrayal and family reconstruction had earned international recognition. The therapy protocol she developed while working with Brian's children now helped countless families heal from similar traumas. The children's healing had been remarkable, though not without challenges. Jack had channeled his anger into academic excellence, graduating high school early and diving into pre-med studies. Emma's art therapy had evolved into a passion for understanding human behavior, leading her towards psychiatry. Sophie, too young to fully remember the trauma, had nonetheless developed an uncanny ability to detect deception. Sandy's influence had been crucial to their recovery. Her approach, patient, honest, and consistently supportive, provided the maternal warmth they needed without any attempt to replace their biological mother. She'd supported Brian's uncompromising stance on contact with Pamela and June, while helping the children process their feelings about the betrayal. The Vermont properties were finally liquidated, Lawrence updated, producing more documents. The proceeds will be held in trust for the children, though I doubt they'll need it. Your surgical practice is more successful than ever. Indeed, Brian's professional standing had only been enhanced by the scandal. His colleagues admired his ruthless pursuit of truth and justice, while his patients appreciated his unwavering commitment to medical ethics. He'd been appointed to the hospital's ethics committee, where he worked to prevent similar frauds from occurring. Later that evening, Brian sat in his home office, updating the family records he still maintained with surgical precision. The latest entries reflected a stability hard-won through uncompromising adherence to truth. Pamela, serving year 3 of 8-year sentence. All appeals exhausted. No contact orders maintained. Devin, beginning 15-year federal sentence. Medical license permanently revoked in all 50 states. June, 12-year sentence upheld. Additional financial crimes still under investigation. Children, thriving academically and emotionally. Regular therapy maintained for prevention rather than crisis. Sandy, second anniversary approaching. Children's relationships with her continue to strengthen naturally. A knock at his office door revealed Emma, holding one of her old therapy paintings. "Found this while cleaning my room," she said. "Remember when everything was chaos?" Brian studied the turbulent artwork from 4 years ago, contrasting it with the confident young woman his daughter had become. "How do you feel looking at it now?" "Grateful," she replied thoughtfully. "Not for what they did, but for how you handled it. You showed us that standing for truth matters more than pretending everything's okay." Jack appeared in the doorway, his laptop displaying a medical school application. "Dad, can you review my personal statement? I wrote about how watching you maintain ethical standards influenced my career choice." Sophie joined them, carrying her science project, another genetic study, but this time on genetic markers in cancer prediction. Her interest in medical science had developed naturally, without any pressure from Brian. Sandy completed the family gathering, bringing coffee and her characteristic warmth. The hospital board called, she informed Brian. "They want you to head the new ethics and medical practice initiative." Brian surveyed his family. Not the one that betrayal had shattered, but the stronger one they'd built from truth and integrity. The consequences of Pamela, Devin, and June's actions had been severe, but they'd served their purpose. No one who witnessed their downfall would dare attempt similar deceptions in Boston's medical community. The scandal had exposed every crack in their seemingly perfect life, but from those breaks, something stronger had emerged. Brian's ruthless pursuit of justice had not only punished the guilty, but had created a foundation for genuine healing. His phone buzzed, another update from the prison system. Pamela had attempted to send Christmas cards to the children, violating the no-contact order yet again. The cards would join the others in the evidence file, documenting each failed attempt to circumvent the consequences of her choices. "Dad!" Sophie's voice drew his attention back. "Can we have dinner on the patio?" Sandy made your favorite. Brian secured the files with practiced efficiency. The past was thoroughly documented, but no longer controlled their present. His uncompromising stance had protected his children, allowing them to build new lives unburdened by manipulation and lies. As they gathered for dinner, Brian observed his family with the same attention he brought to his most complex surgeries. Jack discussing medical ethics, Emma sharing insights from her psychology studies, Sophie explaining genetic markers with precocious precision, and Sandy bringing warmth to their analytical discussions. The consequences of betrayal had rippled through Boston's medical and social communities, serving as a warning to others who might contemplate similar deceptions. But for Brian's family, those consequences had forged a stronger unit, bound by truth rather than pretense, and guided by integrity rather than expedience. That evening, reviewing next week's surgery schedule, Brian allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His ruthless pursuit of justice hadn't just punished the guilty. It had created an environment where truth could flourish, showing his children that unwavering integrity, even in the face of betrayal, was the surest foundation for a genuine life. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.